In Yu-Gi-Oh, winning on your first turn before your opponent gets their turn at all is called an FTK. And FTK decks are very rare or incredibly inconsistent, so you don't see them very often, and that's a really good thing. But occasionally, a viable one comes around and gets a bunch of cards from that combo banned. So at number 10, we have Gallis, the Star Beast Monster Mass FTK. This deck utilizes 3 cards, Koike Mirror Doom, Gallis the Star Beast, and G-Nex Ally Birdman. With these 3 cards, you can make a near infinite loop of burn damage, which will be a common theme throughout this list. So before we go into the combo itself, let me explain each of the cards. Koike Mirror Doom is a level 3 wind monster that negates all effects of light and dark monsters, specifically during the main phase. It's important to word it in both that Doom doesn't destroy the negated monster. Gallis the Star Beast is a level 3 earth monster that allows you to reveal itself from your hand, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, and if it was a monster, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's level times 200, then special summon Gallis to the field. This effect is not once per turn, so you can kind of see how the FTK works. The last piece of this puzzle is G-Nex Ally Birdman, a level 3 dark monster that has the effect where you can return a face-up monster you control to the hand to special summon Birdman from your hand, and like Gallis, this effect is not once per turn. So here's how the combo works. First, you need to have Gallis, Doom, and Birdman in your hand. Then you normal summon Doom. Once he's on the field, you can activate Gallis' effect to reveal the top card of your deck to inflict burn damage and special summon Gallis to the field. Then, from your hand, you can activate Birdman to return Gallis to the hand with its cost, but with Doom's effect, Birdman's special summon is negated, so it stays in your hand, but still returns Gallis to the hand. So now you have an infinite loop of special summoning Gallis and burning if you reveal a monster. But to guarantee that you will always draw a monster, you play nothing but monsters in your deck, or a monster mash deck. The Gallis FTK typically uses cards in the monster mash that have effects that activate when they're sent to the graveyard, like Cockroach Knight or Petin the Dark Clown, but also some good boss monsters like Dark Armed Dragon and the Dark Creator that can special summon themselves when certain cards are in the graveyard. Unfortunately, this FTK deck isn't that usable anymore, as Birdman was limited to 1 copy. So the consistency of this deck has plummeted. Plus, the core of the FTK was used in some Burning Abyss decks that wanted to spam out level 3 monsters and take advantage of Sekka's Light, and was pretty successful in competitive events. And at number 9, we have Magical Explosion FTK. As the name suggests, Magical Explosion FTK revolves around the trap card Magical Explosion. This is a trap card that deals 200 damage to your opponent for each spell card in your graveyard. So as you can imagine, the whole deck is built around getting as many spell cards in your graveyard as possible, and then as soon as it switches to your opponent's turn, you activate Magical Explosion to one-shot your opponent. There were 2 main versions of this FTK in the past, one with Tempest Magician and a Monarch variant. The Tempest Magician variant was based around a level 6 synchro monster that combos insanely well with the Magical Explosion. The effect reads that once per turn, you can discard any number of cards to place spell counters on monsters you control. Then you can remove the spell counters to inflict minor damage to your opponent for each one. Especially with the field spell Magical Citadel of Endymion that generates a spell counter each time a spell card resolves. So by utilizing cards like Toon Table of Contents or Dark World Dealings, and then with Tempest Magician and Endymion to do even more damage when spell counters are at play, it's pretty achievable to deal the full 8,000 points of damage required to win, which would be even better today after Selene Queen of Master Magicians was released in 2020. Another way Magical Explosion FTK saw usage was with Monarchs. That deck, appropriately named Monarch Explosion, used the different Monarch spell cards to cycle through the different spell cards of the deck. Additionally, rather than using the Monarch field spell Domain of the Monarchs, the deck used Chicken Game, because rather than solely relying on having enough spell cards in the grave deal 8,000 points of damage, there was a card called Life Equalizer. This card only works when there's a difference of 8,000 life points between you and your opponent, and when there was this difference, both yours and your opponent's lives would drop to 3,000. So with Chicken Game on the field plus Upstart Goblin, Life Equalizer made the FTK a lot easier to pull off by dropping your opponent's life points to 3,000 rather than having to burn 8,000. Similar to the Gallis Monster Mash FTK, the core piece of the combo was sent to the limited list. Konami sent Magical Explosion to the limited list back in 2010, and the deck lost some popularity. However, it did see competitive usage up until 2016, and the card is just straight up banned in the OCG, so Konami is obviously still afraid of its power. Next up at number 8, we have the Gishkill FTK, which uses Eve Gishki Mind August's effect to deck out your opponent, or burn your opponent, whichever you prefer. Mind August's effect shuffles 5 cards from either player's graveyards back into the deck on its ritual summon. So at first glance, Mind August doesn't seem like it can first turn kill, because how are you going to win by shuffling cards back into the deck? Well, the entire Gishki archetype is focused around ritual summoning their different boss monster rituals with their different Gishki ritual cards. So you can bring out Mind August multiple times during the same turn. The decking your opponent out part comes from the deck using tons of spells that make your opponent go through their hand, like Card Destruction, Cup of Ace, or Dark World Dealings. So by constantly ritual summoning Mind August, you could basically keep reusing all of these cards to deck out your opponent by just putting them back into your deck and then drawing them again. Most Gishkill decks ran 2 copies of Mind August, so if one was in the graveyard, you could ritual summon the other to shuffle the one that was in the graveyard back into the deck with the materials, creating an endless cycle. The FTK was pretty strong and took up to 40 minutes to accomplish, which as you can imagine caused a lot of problems for tournaments. This led to the EVE Gishkill Mind August being limited in 2013 ban list, simply due to how long it took to perform the FTK. However, this didn't fully stop the Gishkill FTK. A variant called the Single August came into play, which had the same idea, but was just a lot less consistent. Then, with the release of many hand traps after 2017, the deck became way too inconsistent to play in the modern era, so they just relieved Gishkill from the ban list. And at number 7, we have the Exodia FTK deck. Exodia FTK is infamous in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, and is an all-time classic FTK. With the one-of-a-kind win condition of assembling all 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand, you just instantly win the duel. So, as you can imagine, the entire FTK is built around drawing and assembling the 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand as fast as possible. And if you're lucky enough, you can just draw into all 5 pieces in your first starting hand and win instantly. There are a couple of different engines that exist that manage to get all 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand. One of the best engines to achieve the Exodia FTK is with the forbidden Butterfly Dagger Elma. This card has the effect that when it's sent to the graveyard while equipped to a monster, you can return Butterfly Dagger Elma to the hand. The engine worked with Jolie Wheeler's infamous Gearfree the Iron Knight that has the effect that if either player equips an equip card to Gearfree, you can destroy the equip card. So the combination of the two allows you to constantly reuse Butterfly Dagger Elma. The last part of the Exodia Butterfly engine is with the Royal Magical Library. This card gains spell counters each time a spell is activated, and once you have 3 spell counters, you can draw 1 card. So by constantly equipping Elma to Gearfree, destroying Elma, gaining a spell counter for its activation, and then re-equipping it, you can draw through your whole deck pretty easily. However, this engine doesn't work anymore as Butterfly Dagger Elma was banned in 2005. But there are other engines that utilize Exodia's instant win ability. Lots of Exodia decks use Royal Magical Library with other spell cards, like Upstart Goblin or One Day Apiece to draw as many cards as possible. However, the Exodia decks are not that consistent because you have to search through most of your deck in one turn to assemble all 5 pieces, which themselves are garnets that can actually cause you to lose if you draw too many of them too early when starting your combos. And since so many of the best draw cards are banned or heavily limited in how you can use them, modern Exodia isn't really a thing, although it's always one good piece of support away from being viable again. And at number 6, we have the Empty Jar FTK. This deck uses Morphing Jar's effect alongside the cards that can flip Morphing Jar face up and face down to deck out your opponent. Morphing Jar is an older Yu-Gi-Oh card that has a flip effect that when flip face up, both players discard their hands and then draw 5 new cards. So you can kind of see the win condition, just flipping Morphing Jar 7 times if your opponent runs a 40 card deck, excluding the 5 cards they draw with their opening hand. Outside of Morphing Jar, the deck also uses another monster, Needleworm, which also is a flip effect monster that mills the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck. But how can you flip a card so many times in one turn? Well, the deck mainly uses the Book of cards, like Book of Eclipse, Book of Moon, and Book of Taiyu, that'll have the effects to change the battle position of a monster by either flipping them face up or face down once more. Book of Eclipse also gets a special mention because not only does it flip your monsters face down, but it changes your opponent's as well, and lets your opponent draw during the end phase. So it could be the finishing blow per se. There are also some other notable battle position changing cards that are seen with this FTK deck type. There's A&D Changer that can banish itself to change the battle position of one monster that's on the field, and there's Darkness Approaches that can flip a monster face down by discarding 2 cards from your hand. These 2 cards were actually used quite a lot together in the past, not only to flip Morphing Jar and Needleworm face down, but to get A&D Changer in the grave to use its effect because Morphing Jar gave you more than enough discard fodder with its Draw 5 effect. On top of that, the deck also likes Burial from a Different Dimension to recycle A&D Changer's effect because, like Morphing Jar and Needleworm, it's not once per turn if you can get it back into the graveyard. Like other mill decks, the Empty Jar FTK uses a lot of drawing cards for both you and your opponent to help them get through their deck. So the classics of Card Destruction, Dark World Dealings, and One Day Apiece are also included in this deck as well. However, since a lot of common hand traps can actually stop the combo, the inherent strategy of milling your opponent by giving them 5 new cards each time can work against you in the modern day. And at number 5, we have the Gem Knight FTK. This FTK involves using the burn damage from Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli, as well as Gem Knight Master Diamond's copying effect to deal massive burn damage. So the FTK relies on a couple of cards: Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli, Gem Knight Master Diamond, Brilliant Fusion, Gem Knight Seraphonite, and Gem Knight Fusion. Brilliant Fusion is the cornerstone of the FTK. The continuous spell has the effect that when activated, you can fusion summon 1 Gem Knight monster using monsters from your deck as fusion materials, but that monster has 0 attack and defense. And when Brilliant Fusion is destroyed, you destroy the summoned monster. There's also a secondary effect to help the monster regain the lost attack points, but that doesn't matter as much. Then there's Gem Knight Fusion, which is basically a recyclable polymerization. You can banish one Gem Knight monster from your graveyard to add Gem Knight fusion back to your hand, and this isn't a once per turn effect. And now the monsters. First, there's Gem Knight Seraphonite, which is the first monster you bring out with the FTK. This is a level 5 Earth Fairy monster that needs to be fusion summoned with a Gem Knight monster and a Light monster. Seraphonite has the effect that during the main phase, you get an additional normal summon, which on its own is an amazing effect as they got the entire Brilliant Fusion engine popularized. Next up is Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli, who's the most important card of the combo. She has the once per turn effect where you can send one Gem Knight monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard to deal 500 points damage to your opponent for each special summon monster on the field. So with a full field of 6 monsters, you're doing 3000 points of burn damage. And now the pieces of the puzzle of how the FTK works are coming into place. But you might ask, if Lapis' effect is only once per turn, how can you deal 8000 points of damage? Well, it's because the effect is only a soft once per turn, but there are extra restrictions on the card where you can only special summon the monster once per turn, so you can't really just bring out 2 others to FTK. So, the last critical piece of the FTK is Gem Knight Master Diamond. So with Master Diamond's effect, you can once per turn banish one Gem Knight fusion monster from your graveyard, and Master Diamond copies its effects that turn. So by banishing Lazuli, you can deal another 3000 points of damage to your opponent. In a perfect world, you'd be able to bring out another Master Diamond to deal the remaining damage, but he's been limited to 1 copy precisely because of this. Outside of the monsters that are 100% required for the FTK, there's also Gem Knight Lazuli and Gem Knight Obsidian, that both generate good advantage when sent to the graveyard. Lazuli can add a normal monster to the hand when it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, and Obsidian can special summon a normal monster from the graveyard it's sent to the graveyard from the hand. Both of these cards are great for fusion materials and help with recycling the fusion materials needed for the combo. So how the FTK works is basically fill your field with special summon monsters with Gem Knight Fusion, as you can essentially keep recycling cards. Then, when your field is full, you can use Lapis Lazuli's effect to burn for 3000 damage. Then, you need to summon Gem Knight Master Diamond to copy the effect of Lapis Lazuli for another 3000 points of damage, and then for the remaining 2000 life points, you summon a second Gem Knight Master Diamond to burn for the remaining points, usually by resetting it with Nightmare Unicorn. The FTK was really good and saw play through 2018 and 2019 due to the newly introduced Gem Knight Link monster, Gem Knight Phantom Quartz, Crystal Rose to get another special summon on the field, and Block Dragon to search all the combo pieces and provide yet another special summon on the field. Later on, Nightmare Unicorn was added to the combo to bounce Gem Knight Master Diamond back to the deck to summon him once again once it got limited. But the FTK is considered pretty inconsistent because to deal the full 3000 points of damage, you need to have uninterrupted plays to get all 5 monsters special summoned onto the field. And with the abundance of hand traps, that typically is an issue for the Gem Knight FTK deck. In addition to Block Dragon and Brilliant Fusion getting banned, which hurt the consistency of the deck enough to no longer make it competitively viable, even if it is technically still doable. However, just to note, the entire FTK is still absolutely possible in Master Duel since Block Dragon and Brilliant Fusion are unbanned there. And at number 4, we have the Pendulum FTK. The way this FTK was accomplished was very simple. What you would do is get 4 Dark Pendulum monsters on the field, 2 effect monsters, and then use those 4 Dark Pendulum monsters to fusion summon out 2 Supreme King Dragon Starving Venoms. Then use the 2 effect monsters to go into Predaplant Verte Anaconda. You would use the Predaplant monster in order to copy the effect of Instant Fusion in order to special summon Lyrilless Independent Nightingale from your extra deck. Then you would simply use the effect of both of the Supreme Kings in order to copy the effect of Nightingale and burn your opponent for 4000 points of damage each, which resulted in an easy first turn kill. And what was especially deadly about this first turn kill was that you could accomplish this by just doing your plays like normal. If you were playing a Pendulum deck and somehow your FTK got disrupted in some way, you could still end on a pretty decent board, or just shift into one of your other strategies. This is one of the few FTKs in the game that could be accomplished by just playing a normal competitive meta deck, with only going into a few alternative plays in order to just win on your first turn, instead of setting up a whole bunch of negates. Of course, if your FTK was stopped, you'd obviously be in a worse position than if you just tried to set up some negates. But you wouldn't be completely out of luck, like with a lot of the other FTKs in this video. And since this FTK was live during an era of widespread use of hand traps, it also proved to be usable through hand traps as well, which a lot of these other FTK strategies fold under a single hand trap, because your win condition was just to get 6 monsters on board, and you could kind of accomplish that in a lot of different ways. Although, just like any combo, throw enough hand traps at it and it will fold as well, because you do need to get those 6 monsters on board in order to accomplish the FTK. Or just hard draw into Instant Fusion and get 4 Dark Pendulum monsters on board. But seeing as Pendulum decks are able to special summon a whole bunch of Pendulum monsters from your hand through their main mechanic, that's not as hard as you'd think. Currently, this FTK is still usable in Master Duel, but not in the TCG format, since Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom is banned in the TCG. And at number 3, we have Danger Dark World FTK. This deck uses the pre-errata effect of Firewall Dragon alongside Danger and Dark World monsters to generate an infinite source of ammunition for Shadow Priestess of Ohm. So the deck basically abuses 3 cards: Grapha, Firewall Dragon, and Shadow Priestess of Ohm, or a Cannon Soldier card. The FTK only works with the pre-errata version of Firewall Dragon, meaning that Konami had to change the Firewall Dragon's effect and reprint the card just to stop the combo. The errata only changed the second effect of the card, that if a monster this card points to is destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 monster from your hand. This was later changed to specifically be once per turn and to only special summon Cyberse monsters. Now, the other part of this FTK is Grapha, Dragon Lord of the Dark World. The Dark World archetypes are all about discarding themselves and gaining effects depending on which player discards them. This works especially well with their boss monster, Grapha, who can easily special summon himself from the graveyard by returning a Dark World monster that you control to the hand. The damage dealer FTK is Shadow Priestess of Ohm. This is a level 4 Dark Spellcaster with the effect to tribute 1 face-up Dark monster to deal 800 points of damage to your opponent. The effect isn't once per turn, so you can keep reusing the effect to burn for 8,000 points of damage each time. But if it's just these 3 cards for the combo, why is the FTK called Danger Dark World? Well, the Danger archetype is phenomenal at link climbing and synergizes really well with the Dark World cards, as they both love to be discarded. So with Danger monsters, you can easily link climb into Curious, the Lightsworn Dominion, and summon Sorceress to finally get into Firewall Dragon. So by link climbing with the Danger cards into Firewall Dragon and having Shadow Priestess on the field, you can start the combo. By constantly returning Beige, Vanguard of Dark World to the hand, you can keep special summoning Grapha from the graveyard to be used by Shadow Priestess to deal 8,000 points of damage to your opponent with its effect. Then with Firewall Dragon, you could just special summon the Dark World monster back, to then repeat the loop by bringing out Grapha again. So by repeating this combo 9 times and using Ohm herself as the final tribute, you win the duel. Unfortunately, the FTK really took a hit with Firewall Dragon's errata, and for that reason, the deck just can't pull off the FTK anymore to the same effect. The FTK was also possible with 2 copies of A Assault Core, which got that card limited on the ban list for a hot second, before they banned and changed Firewall Dragon instead. And at number 2, we have Frog FTK. The infamous Frog FTK is an unstoppable train of toads that was only halted by the banning of Substitoad in 2010. This FTK used the Toad cards alongside Mass Driver to make an infinite loop of damage, similar to the Dark World Danger FTK. What makes this FTK so scary is that it was really easy to pull off and was hard to stop. So first, part of the combo is to get Substitoad on the field, which is easy with cards like Salvage or 1-for-1. Then you need any monster as a tribute fodder for Substitoad, as its effect lets you tribute 1 monster to special summon another Frog monster from your deck, except for Frog the Jam. Then you need to keep tributing this special summon Frog to get at least 18 Frog monsters in the graveyard, and that one of them is a copy of Ronin Totem. So now that you have everything set up in the graveyard, all you need to do is activate Mass Driver, which has a similar effect to Shadow Priestess of Ohm, that you can tribute a card to inflict 400 points of damage to your opponent. Then all you have to do is tribute both cards on the field for Mass Driver for 800 points of damage, and then activate Ronin Toad's effect to banish a Frog to the graveyard to special summon it back. Ronin Toad's effect isn't once per turn, and with Ronin Toad being able to come back 18 other times, you could deal the remaining 7,200 points of damage. Simple, clean, and easy. When the FTK first came out, it was surprisingly consistent and easy to pull off, and so it saw a lot of competitive success and even won the 2010 World Championship. But Konami banned Substitoad following its championship win, and the deck became rather obsolete. Although while the Frogburn FTK deck played a significant role in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, this next deck arguably pioneered FTK decks as a whole. The last and final FTK on this list is Magical Scientist FTK. The classic and arguably hated FTK is one of the strongest there was, and was one of the best for its time. This deck used a combination of Magical Scientist and Catapult Turtle to deal massive amounts of damage in one turn. The Magical Scientist FTK is one of the original creators of the theme of loading up ammunition for burn damage. Magical Scientist is a level 1 Dark Spellcaster type monster that has the insanely busted effect to pay 1,000 life points to special summon 1 level 6 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck in face-up attack or defense position. That fusion monster cannot attack your opponent's life points directly and is returned to your extra deck at the end of the turn. So by combining Magical Scientist's effect with Catapult Turtle to tribute a monster to inflict damage based on half of the tributed monster's attack, you can just load up your extra deck with a high attack level 6 fusion monsters who have 2,200 attack or more, then finish the game by tributing Magical Scientist and Catapult Turtle for the remaining 300 damage. Decks during the time would use a combination of Last Will and Gillosaurus to get both Catapult Turtle and Magical Scientist on the field. First, you would activate Gillosaurus' effect to special summon it from the hand for free if your opponent had no monsters in the graveyard, or still for free even if they did. But if it's the first turn of the game, they typically wouldn't have anything in the graveyard, so it didn't matter. Then tribute Gillosaurus to tribute summon Catapult Turtle, which would then allow you to use Last Will to special summon 1 monster with 1,500 attack or less from your deck if a monster inside the field was sent to the graveyard that turn, which in the case would be Magical Scientist. And then you can start launching with Catapult Turtle by tributing all your highest attack level 6 monsters by reusing the effect of Magical Scientist over and over. So winning off of 2 cards was definitely an issue for the game. Even just cheating out level 6 fusion monsters from the deck alone with Magical Scientist's effect was phenomenal, and saw usage outside of the FTK with Chaos decks. So Konami not only banned Magical Scientists, but also Last Will, and to really put the nail in the coffin, they even errated Catapult Turtle to only be once per turn. But it can't be denied that Magical Scientist FTK was one of the first and most influential FTKs in the game's history. Alright, and that's the list. Unfortunately, or fortunately, a lot of the FTK decks seen in this list don't work as well as they used to, but they still had a huge impact on the game in one way or another. If you think we missed any other more important FTK decks, or have ideas for future videos similar to this one, please let us know in the comments below.